It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in. Take Command podcast time, and it is time to preview the Buccaneers and the Commanders. 4:25 on Sunday, Logan. I have no idea why this game's at 4:25. It's being played on the East Coast. I know the Jayden Daniels debut is definitely a big deal for the league, and they're excited. Not the game I expected to be in the 4 o'clock window, but hey, we'll take a nice 1 o'clock window to warm us up. Throw on Red Zone, or you'll actually be at the stadium preparing for the game. I'll throw on a Red Zone, and then at 4:25 we flip on over, and you get to watch the ball fly in the air with the new fancy kickoff, and we got football.
Yeah, it was funny. I was looking at our itinerary for travel, and I was like, why are we leaving so late for the stadium? And then I was like, oh, the game's not until 4:20. So a little surprising for me too, but it's good. Good for the organization to get like a semi-prime time window,
Yeah, not many of them this year. A lot of 1 o'clock kicks. And by the way, what we're going to do for the post-game show is for road games, we're going to rotate, Logan, all of our main hosts from 106.7 The Fan and the Team 980. So I don't know exactly who is going to be with me on Sunday yet because we had to lock it down, but it might be Sheehan. It might be one of the junkies.
Wow.
But you'll hear from all those guys throughout the year when Logan can't join us because, well, he's on the road and has to then get on the plane and all that kind of good stuff. But Logan will be with us for home games on the Instant Reaction Show. And, of course, Logan and I will be here during the week for all the usual stuff that you're used to in terms of the film reviews on Tuesdays and then the previews on Thursdays. We also are going to release those sooner this year, Logan, for the people. We're going to give you more time to listen. So look for those in your feeds on Tuesdays and Thursdays pretty much as soon as possible after we're done recording them. So excited for that. We'll let you know on the Hoffman Show on the radio who to expect on Sunday, or just show up 7:30 Sunday night here on YouTube at the Team 980, and then it'll be here in your podcast feed if you're actually listening right now. Wherever here is, it will be there as soon as we can turn it around. So with all of that housekeeping out of the way, Logan, let's get into it. Let's get into our first preview of the year, and let us talk about the Tampa offense, what we see from them, what we think is threatening, and what this Washington defense will do. A huge test in week one. They have some supremely talented wide receivers, amongst others. But when I say Tampa offense, what is the first line item for you?
Yeah, for me, it's Liam Cohen, I think. He's the new offensive coordinator there coming from Kentucky by way of the Los Angeles Rams. And so, he's kind of one of these guys that is Kyle Shanahan disciple by, he's like the third generation disciple via Sean. And so, I have a lot of respect for this offense. I have a lot of respect for how they, how this staff, how this tree specifically approaches game planning and stuff. So I'm really curious to see what it looks like because it's like another offshoot. It's like another, just like Kyle and Sean have their thing. Mike's got his thing. Matt LaFleur up in Green Bay has his thing. Bobby Slowick has his thing. Like, what does this iteration look like? And so kind of trying to anticipate or predict what this offense would be given the weapons that they have, given the investments that they've made in the offensive line specifically. They drafted Graham Barton in the first round, a guy that we were both pretty high on coming out. They extend Tristan Wirfs, Cody Mauch last year. I think he was a third-round pick. Gadecki, the right tackle, I think was a second-round pick. So they've made a pretty significant investment. And when you watch the preseason, obviously it's preseason specifically against Miami, their starters only played like 7 snaps, but they were running Miami's defensive line out the club. And again, that could have been the twos. I don't know exactly what the situation was there, but that's a good group. And so does their run game look more like what Kyle's doing in San Francisco? Does it look like what Sean's doing with like the duo power gap scheme stuff in LA? So I think that's going to be really compelling. Like, what personnels are they going to be in? They drafted McClellan, I think is his name, from UW, the receiver. Yeah. Jalen McMillan, excuse me. And he I really liked him coming out. Pair him with Mike Evans and Godwin. Like, that could be a very formidable 11 personnel, and you're looking at something very akin to LA, But they do have a good kind of stable at tight ends also with Cade Otton, who is a guy that has shown he can be a playmaker in this league. So I think that, to me, is the biggest storyline, is like for Joe Witt Jr., like, what are we trying to attack? Are we trying to stop the run? Are we trying to kind of coach up some of the traditional play pass concepts you see? Are we coaching keepers? there's just a lot that this offense can bring, and it's tough coming off him being at Kentucky because we don't really know exactly what this sucker's going to look like.
Yeah, for sure. What we do know is what Tampa was last year, and they were a team that would absolutely push the ball down the field. Dave Canales had them, dial up a decent number of play action shots, but they also spread it out quite a bit. And I think that's going to be an interesting thing this year for them is a lot of their shots. I went back and, we obviously on the last show had Bill Smith, and he gave us the great demo of NFL Pro, and I put that sucker to use this week, Logan, and watching film is going to be a little bit easier this year. But I watched all of Baker Mayfield's 20-plus yard throws down the field. So every single time the ball traveled over 20 yards in the air. And a lot of them are out of more spread formations. And that isn't necessarily kind of the Sean Kyle MO. And so if that's how Baker likes it, a shorter quarterback, maybe he likes to be in the gun. Obviously Sean has spent more time in the gun with Stafford the past couple of years since Matt got there, because that's something that he likes and he can just deal from back there. But I think that is an interesting mix of like how much are they spreading it out, using some of that 11 personnel, maybe even 10 personnel with 4 receivers on the field, which they used quite a bit last year. And especially they like to spread teams out. It's kind of similar to what Cliff wants to do. Let's spread you out. Let's try to create some one-on-one matchups. And boy, if Mike Evans was one-on-one, would Baker throw that sucker? Like, he is hyper aggressive in trying to take advantage of even two deep coverages where he would be like, okay, that honey hole shot's going to be there. We're going to run Mike Evans on a bench route right into that honey hole, and I'm going to try to squeeze that sucker in there. And so, there's obviously the pressure packages and the run fits and all that kind of stuff. But I think the top line item all year for this team is going to be, kind of the modus operandi of the NFL. How do you stop explosives? And some of that is going to come with creating turnovers and picking off some of those balls that Baker Mayfield's going to try to squeeze into space, because that is his MO, is to squeeze balls in, be super aggressive. And, it's going to come down to whether, to me, like the biggest thing this week for this team is major test for BSJ and Forbes in week 1 as starting corners. Just how good did they get under this new coaching staff quickly? Not that defines who they are for the season, but we're going to get a real gut check on where they are coming out of the preseason.
Yeah, 100%. And, obviously it's a dynamic bunch of playmakers. And I agree, like Baker did some stuff that was really positive from the spread last year. But also I look at what he did with Stefanski in Cleveland, and it was a heavy play action, heavy boot. That was maybe the most effective year of his career. You know what I mean? And that was 3 years ago, 2 years ago, whatever that was. So obviously he's done a lot, and I think he fits this offense really well because he can move a little bit. He can run around a little bit. You can get him off target. You can change the launch point. But to me, I think the number one storyline, obviously the coverage is going to be a big deal. But when you listen to Dan in his presser, when you talk to some of the staff, it's like, we got to affect the quarterback. And I think that's, been a tenet of Dan and Joe Wood Jr.'s defense, obviously last year in Dallas. So to me, it's like, the secondary's got to hold up and you got to make that go. But also, how are we affecting the quarterback? How are we making him uncomfortable? And, I'm really excited to see John and Duran, get their first kind of meaningful playing time with Dorrance Armstrong, who's a new piece. How does Frankie Louvu rush? Cleveland Farrell push the pocket a little bit. So to me, I think as much as people want to talk about the secondary, I think the more varied, the more in flux thing that has maybe a larger effect on that is the rush. And so what can you do? And so obviously if you want to have a good rush, you got to be really effective on first, second down. And I know I'm kind of speaking in platitudes, and this is general football kind of 101. But if I can get you to 3rd and 7, we can rush the passer. If you're in 3rd and 2, we're going to have a hard time doing that because we've got to be of two minds. We've got to stop the run, and then we can rush the passer. So, and I think when you look at stuff they've done in practice, there's been a pretty comprehensive blitz packages they put in. And so I'm really excited to see those executed. But yeah, to me, it's what's the plan to get Baker off the spot and make him feel a little uncomfortable and collapse that pocket? Because like I said, they have a pretty talented offensive line, but I think it's one of those things where it's that group, again, with the rush can be elevated with the pen a little bit through scheme, especially given that it's week 1 and they haven't shown a lot of what I think they're going to be doing. So, I agree. It's going to be a huge challenge for the secondary. It's going to be a huge challenge for St. Just and Forbes and Sanders still and all these different guys, but I think you can help them out. Again, because I forget what I was doing. I was doing breakdowns for some of my NFL guys, and I was just watching, offense around the NFL. And I was like, when a quarterback is unaffected, it might as well be a first down. But when there's a little bit of pressure, when the pocket collapses, when they can't escape, when they can't have a clean line of sight, it really makes that group less effective. So I think that's maybe maybe the bigger issue for me is the rush.
Yeah, no, and this is a yes and statement. This is not me trying to push back at all, to be very, very, very clear. But those two things go together, right? We've talked about that quite a bit. How does the rush and the coverage marry? Covering Mike Evans for 2.2 seconds is terrible because he's Mike Evans and he's awesome. Covering Mike Evans for 3.5 or 4 seconds is a literal nightmare.
It's worse.
And so if you can make sure the ball is out, you at least give yourself a fighting chance to jump a route, to be right there. It's less time you have to stay connected, less time for double moves. Some of the big plays he got last year were on double moves. A couple of touchdowns that he scores are on double moves. So don't let that stuff happen. But then so that's the platitude level, Logan. What does that functionally look like and we don't know Joe Witt's tendencies yet because he's never called plays in the NFL. But do you anticipate them blitzing more on first and second down to try to kind of force the issue, or is it more 4-man rush? Like how do they go about and situationally, like what are the things to watch for to kind of if you're them, seed that success?
Yeah, so I went back and watched last year's Dallas game versus the Rams, and again I know Liam Cohen wasn't there, but again like you kind of get a feel for what he was doing in LA the year prior, and like how Dan Quinn and obviously the staff, which Joe Witt Jr. was on, kind of approached it. And I think the thing that surprised me about that game is just how much man-to-man coverage they were in, and that's something I don't think they'll do here. And I think when you look at obviously the rush specifically, they have Micah Parsons, and Micah Parsons is an absolute beast. Like they did a great job of kind of finding him good matchups, moving around the formation, lining him in the center, running him on stunts, and he's able to create a ton of pressure. However, what I would say is that when I look at what they've done in training camp, and I kind of think about like what the personnel here is, I think you're going to see a lot more stuff, a lot more like of the kitchen sink. And so that's pressures, but that's also pass rushing line stunts, that's simulated pressures. And I know people throw that word around a lot, but basically it's like, simulated pressures when you bring a blitz, but you drop people out, and so you're still just bringing 4. Right?
So you're bringing. So if you think of 4 down, like okay, those 4 come. Obviously, that's not a blitz. If you think of like, a linebacker or safety comes, that is a blitz. Well, you can also mix the two, where you drop out a defensive lineman and bring let's say a safety, and that is a 4-man pressure. So thus it is not classified as a blitz, but it's not the 4 expected rushers. So when we say simulated pressure, that's the easiest explanation of what that means.
I mean, it's technically it's still a blitz, but to your point, it's not like an overload pressure or the way that you would try to do traditionally. So yeah, I think that's something I'd keep an eye on. Also, like Frankie Luvu, I went back and watched again some clips of him like rushing the passer. And not only is he's pretty good online, but he's great versus backs. Like he kills backs. And so I want to see if I can find that dude a one-on-one matchup where he's lined up with the running back. And again, like there's a way where you can kind of get to a 3-man overload with the defensive end wide, and you got to like dictate the protection there a little bit, and you can get him one-on-one with the back. So I think you're going to see a lot of stuff like that. I also think you're going to see a lot of stuff to kind of like trick Baker. And then when they aren't bringing pressure, I would expect just a ton of line stunts. So like, tackle works up the field, defensive end works inside on pass rushing down specifically. Because I think when you look at John and Duran and how they rush, they kind of like to get high in the pocket, and it lends itself perfectly to like a TE, where the end comes underneath. So I would just, you're not going to, what I would say is you're not going to see as much straight rush as you saw last year with Jack Del Rio, and I think you'd be hard pressed to find any defense in the NFL that had as much straight rush as they did. But I think you're going to see kind of the other end of the pendulum here, in conjunction with some, what I want to say zone pressures, like where you're bringing pressure but you're playing zone behind it, because I don't know if I would feel comfortable just yet playing like a ton of man-to-man coverage with this defensive back group with these receivers. But again, like that's where,
especially against these receivers, like I don't, who's going to cover Mike Evans? That's the classic kind of question that we ask. And it's like multiple dudes in a zone, because I don't want Emmanuel Forbes or BSJ for a variety of reasons going one-on-one with Mike Evans in man coverage.
And you gotta mix man-to-man coverage in. So like fans out there, like don't be mad when there's an explosive play and it's versus man. Like you have to play it at some point to kind of back up some of your pressures and just to give a quarterback different looks. It's just about when you're doing it, how often you're doing it, like when you feel comfortable incurring that level of risk. And so I actually feel watching Mike Evans, he's maybe the most underrated player in the NFL. He's one of the best receivers of his generation, if not the best receiver. So I'm not taking anything away from him. But I do think that in terms of skill set and matching up, if Benjamin St-Juste is willing to use some of his length, he will match up very well with Mike Evans, because he moves well in the short area. And while Mike Evans has this great long speed, he gets these explosive plays, he's not super sudden in the short area. So I think I'm not trying to hype up Benjamin St-Juste, but I do feel like that matchup kind of fits him a little bit better than like other guys they have in the secondary.
No, he's definitely the guy that I would want. The problem is in the past for BSJ is the flags. And so can you play the technique better than you have in the past? Go back 2 years ago when you were a pretty effective corner as opposed to last year, which was a pretty rough season to say the least. And hopefully we're not going to be talking about last year much longer. We just haven't played any games yet, so we don't have a whole lot of other reference points. But yeah, it's, if Mike Evans has 40 yards receiving, but picks up another 100 on PI flags, then that's not exactly a great day at the office for the Commanders defense. And so that's going to be the challenge, but that's life in the NFL. Some next gen stats for you, Logan, that I want to try to parse out with Baker Mayfield. So he was top 10 in the NFL last year in time to throw. He on average took him 2.71 seconds to throw. However, amongst the other quarterbacks in the top 10, he took more sacks than any of the rest of them. He took 40 sacks, despite the fact that he was getting the ball out in top 10 time to throw. 37.4% of the time he took pressure, which is obviously highest in the top 10 of the time to throw quarterbacks as well. What do you make of that? What is it about Baker that invites pressure, even though maybe down in, down out, he is getting the ball out quickly?
Well, 2.7 is not super. You said it's top 10. What did you say? Say that out again. He's the fastest.
He's the eighth. He was the eighth fastest. So he was a top 10 guy. Tua, for reference, Tua was the best at 2.36. Hilariously, Mac Jones was second at 2.46.
That's wild.
He's in the range with, actually he's tied. 2.71 is the exact same as Dak Prescott. Jared Goff 2.72. Stafford 2.68. So,
Yeah,
amongst the best in the league, but it's not like the ball's flying out like Tua's was.
This is a little bit of a catch-all, but when you watch some of their stuff, I will say like they had pretty good tackle play. I think Wirfs is, again, I think he's probably going to be a top 3 player in the NFL, depending on who you talk to, top 4, how you feel about Jordan Mailata. But like Gadecki was making a position switch from right guard to right tackle, and I think he did a good job. He was much better at tackle than he was at guard, to his credit, but still kind of figuring it out. And then they were starting a bunch of young guards, and there's a reason they go out and they draft a center in the first round. And so with a shorter quarterback like Baker Mayfield, I think any type of internal pressure tends to lead to sacks more frequently because they can't see. And I think you were getting a lot of quick wins from some of those guys inside because, again, they're young players. Like, that's one of the things about offensive line plays. Everyone says, make these draft investments in the offensive line, which is great. Invest in the offensive line. Awesome. But it does take them a little bit of time to figure it out. And I feel like last year, just watching some of the pressures they give up, I didn't watch all the pressures, but if you watch some of the pressures they gave up, you're like, ooh, that's kind of a quick win on the interior, or they didn't quite ID that rush correctly, and so you're going to get some free runners on there. So I think that's another reason I'm a little bit nervous for this Tampa Bay game after kind of doing the prep, is I do think they've improved significantly on the offensive line. I think those guys, like just watching them in the preseason, are playing way better. And again, it's the preseason, so who knows exactly what's going on. And maybe Joe Wood Jr.'s out there throwing guys from all different angles and different rush approaches, and they get confused and they look like they did last year. But I would say that's something that I'm a little concerned about. It's I'm not sure you're going to be able to generate the same pressure because that group has matured and they played together. So in regards to your initial question, I think that's why you see a high pressure number, high sack percentage for Baker last year, but I'm not sure we'll be able to get that same type of impact.
Yeah, you had Cody Mock, for instance, inside, who's a good player. I know you liked a lot coming out, but he came from a lower division. He was D2 player.
Played left tackle in college.
Yeah, and so, going from a D2 left tackle to a right guard, now he's got the whole offseason, puts on the weight, just different body type coming in. That's one of the storylines got out of their camp. Obviously, you do have a rookie center, so can you take advantage even if he's Duke smart in Graham Barton and obviously a tremendously intelligent player that shows up all over his college tape. But yeah, I think that's going to be really interesting to watch.
And the other thing I wanted to say too is they had a really, really high percentage of their passes that went to the running back last year. So like quick screens, like quick flat routes, and I would be really interested to look at that statistic, the time to throw, if you took out screens, and just see where he fell in terms of holding the football. And I know that's hard to sort, and you probably can't do that, but to me, like that was another feature of their offense. Like they were really effective in the screen game last year, and so they did it a lot. And so like those, that ball's out of your hand in a second and a half, so that's going to really bring down your time to throw. So I think it's a myriad of things. I think the offensive line was maybe not as effective as they could have been last year. I think also the play caller understood that Baker liked to hold the football, so we kind of had forced opportunities to get the balls out of his hand very, very quickly. So I think it's probably a myriad of those things. So I think that statistic might be skewing the wrong way, but I don't know for sure.
No, it makes a ton of sense. Last little bit of statistical analysis here as I poke through the next gen stats on NFL Pro. They were 5th in the NFL last year in least blitzed teams. The only 4 quarterbacks that were blitzed less than Baker Mayfield last year were Patrick Mahomes, Tua Tagovailoa, Joe Burrow. Again, I don't know why he's here, but Mac Jones, and then Baker was 5th. So super interesting that, we're talking about, hey, will Joe Witt dial it up? How do they generate pressure? And maybe teams thought with some of the weakness on the interior, they didn't have to blitz as much last year. But Baker faced a blitz less than almost any quarterback in the league last year. So that is something that's certainly interesting. And then amongst those 5 quarterbacks that I just mentioned, Baker's deep throw percentage was a lot higher. So I tend to think you're probably right on with the screen stuff where it's like, we're going to force the ball out of his hands quickly because if we drop him back, his nature is to look for the big shot down the field, which we talked about earlier, that he is more than willing to throw it. So we'll have to see, if Joe Witt is like, yeah, that was a bad strategy everyone was using. Why are you only blitzing 23.8% of the time? Let's throw the kitchen sink at this O-line and see how they handle it. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for. Preview of Jayden Daniels' first NFL football game. All right, let's get into it, Logan. This Tampa defense is super interesting. It is one heck of a challenge for Jayden Daniels and for Cliff Kingsbury's return to the NFL. I was watching a bunch of their pressures this morning, and oh my God, they are coming from everywhere. Todd Bowles been around a long time. He's got a lot of creativity, and the way they deploy their personnel is super interesting. When you watch them defensively, and if you put your Cliff Kingsbury bucket hat on and try to prepare Jayden Daniels for this game, what's your top line item that you got to get him ready for?
Yeah, I think it's just understanding who Todd Bowles is. And again, like it's really interesting because you're coming off, this preseason, offseason where you haven't really showed anything. And one of the things about Todd Bowles, at least in reputation, I think it shows up on film too, to be fair, is that he does like to game plan his pressures. So he's gonna, understand kind of how you call your slides. And what I mean by slide is like if we're in a 4-man front, like where's the center going? And then if the center's going left, like, and I bring a third rusher to the right, like does the back pick him up, or do we have a tight end, or is there a hot answer? And so he does a really good job, kind of like Wink Martindale. Again, the volume's not quite as high as Wink Martindale, but they do a good job of scheming up pressures and bringing different patterns. So each week you're kind of like, what are we going to see? Like, what's going to happen? And I think that can be really, really challenging. And it's so especially for a young player, because it's not only the pattern of the blitz, but it's also who is not blitzing. So, like, there was a couple, I forget what game I was watching. Maybe Minnesota was the first game last year. They're bringing, like, a third down pressure, and it's like a pseudo cross dog where the two guys cross inside, but they're doing it to the weak side, so a little bit spicy, but nothing crazy. But the 3-4 linebackers are dropping into coverage. And most 3-4 linebackers just kind of drop into coverage, and it's like they're just literally like a pylon at a spot, and they're not really covering anything. But obviously they coach those guys because they're trying to relate to receivers, which is very, very hard to do for those guys. But the fact that they're coaching that, I think, shows like what he's thinking about because they live in it. They live in these pressure packages. They want these guys dropping out to be super effective. And obviously they have really good blitzers, like Levante David's a great blitzer. Antoine Winfield Jr. is a great blitzer. Obviously Devin White was maybe the best blitzing linebacker in the NFL last year, or at least one of the most prolific, not there anymore. But it's part of who they are culturally. And so on third down, if it's third and I'd say 6+, you're going to get something spicy. And so if you're Jayden Daniels, like understand that. Understand who the opponent is. Understand, if you can, like where the rotation is as best as possible, and try to understand where your best matchup is. It's going to be harder. Like one of the things he did such a great job in the preseason of is identifying, hey, it's man coverage. I like this man matchup. Let me hit it there. Or it's zone. Let me work the zone side. But obviously in the Miami game, when there was a little bit more in, he had a mistake. And it's one mistake on 14, whatever play, 25 plays, whatever he had in the preseason. So I'm not saying that like that's going to characterize this game. But what are the tools that Cliff is providing for him to dissect the coverage? What are the tools Cliff has installed to help the offense pick up some of these pressures and help Jayden Daniels understand where the hot is? To me, that is the crux of the game, is how do we stay out of crazy third long situations where we're going to get a ton of heat? And then when we're in those, how do I help this young player, if I'm Cliff, maximize these opportunities?
Yeah, I think watching their pressures was so fascinating because they make it I won't say they make it impossible to identify the known rushers, but they move them around more than maybe any defense I've ever watched. And like what happens a lot of times for 3-4 base teams, which they are, is okay, now we're in nickel, now we're just going to go 4 down. That's how the Commanders used to play it back when they were in 3-4 back in the day with like Kerrigan and Preston Smith. Is like the second they went to nickel, they just became a 4 down front, and it was like a 4-2-5 situation, right? What Tampa does more often than not is they'll be like, okay, we're going to keep our standing outside linebackers, and we're going to have 2 guys down, and it'll be Vita Vea and whoever else, and probably now Kalijah Cansey. Those will be our 2 down guys, and then we're going to keep standing linebackers. And oh, by the way, here's this, or rush ends, right, edges, but they're standing. And now we're going to also bring this safety down in the box, and he might be coming, or he might bail out, or this linebacker might be coming, he might bail out, or we might go 3 down. And, but the guy who's lined up in where a 3 technique should be, he's the guy who's standing. Yeah. And so it just is really, really challenging to identify who's coming from where. They move it around. Sometimes they do that with like simulated looks, again, where it's just 4 guys come in. Sometimes they do it with 5 or 6, and it's fairly unpredictable. They'll rush on first down. They'll rush on second. Like I literally sorted their pressures on NFL Pro, and it was like, I just scrolled down the list of plays to see what the down and distances were. Yeah. The amount of times they blitz on 1st and 10 is crazy.
They do blitz a lot. So they blitz a lot on 3rd down, but they do bring a lot of like run stopping pressures on 1st down. Like that showed up a lot, and I was a little surprised by that because it's like that doesn't you always think of blitzing on 3rd down, but what I was talking to somebody and they were like, the number one thing that Todd Bowles is trying to do is stop the run. And so, if you feel like you can't do it with your front, which is tough, it's tough to stop the runs in the NFL if you don't have movement in the front, like I'm going to bring pressure. So I was a little surprised watching that last year because, again, you think about, Vita Vea, like, Levante David, like those guys are, beasts in the interior of the defense, but they're 4 eyes. So, like, they're kind of more like defensive, like nose guard type bodies, but they line up over the tackles in a 3 down spacing. So you got someone over the center, you got someone over the tackles. Their four techniques are Kalijah Cansey, who's like 280 pounds, and Logan Hall, who is a skinny guy. He's like 290 pounds, but he's like 6'7". And they are a little bit more dynamic athletically. And they kind of remind me of like Philadelphia when we used to play them in 2000, I want to say like 11 to 14. They played a 3 down front, but they had all these kind of smaller bodies, and they would move them around a ton, and it made it really hard to create combinations. And I think you see a little bit of that, maybe not that influence, but that kind of stylistically where, hey, I'm Logan Hall on the backside of a run, the guard pulls, I'm going to shoot the gap, which a 4-eye never does. It's almost like they're playing like a 3 technique. So I think from a personnel standpoint, that blitzing on 1st down to me makes a little bit more sense because I want Kalijah Cansey on the move because he is rattlesnake quick, man. He is insane out there. So, and then again, Logan Hall moves around pretty well. They're not maybe the best 4 eyes I've ever seen play, but they are more playmakers than you would expect. And you couple that with Vita Vea and his power on the interior, like it's a pretty formidable group. And if you think about it, like Vita Vea is a 1st round pick, Kalijah Cansey is a 1st round pick, Logan Hall is a 1st round pick. the off rush end, number 9 for them, is a first round pick. Like, go down the list. Yaya Diaby is a 4th round pick. Like, they have a ton invested in their front. Feels very similar to kind of Washington when Montez and Chase and Duran were all here, because like they've got some juice up there. And so that's really the thing that drives the defense, in my opinion. Some people might say the safeties, but I think it makes a lot of sense that he's bringing this type of pressure on first down, because it lets those guys move around a little bit and be a little bit more dynamic.
Yeah, no doubt about it. It's going to be really interesting. And again, this is why they brought Tyler Biadasz in, right? Is because they wanted that veteran center to try to match up with the rookie quarterback who just doesn't have the file yet, even if he's an excellent processor of information. And he's got override ability and all that kind of stuff. And I think as the year goes, we'll see Jayden take more and more command over time. But there's a reason that they wanted, again, not just Biadasz, but we talked about this with the roster construction. Like, did Michael Dieter necessarily have the greatest camp and nail down his spot on the team with his play? No, but I think they wanted a veteran backup just in case something happens to Biadasz, to know that they have another veteran in the building for Jayden Daniels. And so then the question becomes, if you're Cliff Kingsbury, how do you use some of that speed, all that kind of stuff, that aggressive, hey, we'll shoot the gap against you? I think, can you get some good looks with some RPO or some read option? That seems to like it should be on the table. And then obviously you get into the actual pass concepts, Logan. And what do you think is on the table? Or is it more of a run heavy game plan? Is this a big Brian Robinson day? I just took him in the Hoffman Show Fantasy League, so I certainly hope every Sunday is a big Brian Robinson day. But how do you think they kind of, what's the linchpin of the attack? I'll ask it that way. What's the linchpin of the attack this week for how you would attack a Todd Bowles defense with all these moving parts that we've discussed?
Yeah, so I think the thing is, like, when you're bringing pressure the way Todd Bowles does on first down and on third down, like I think his base coverage structure is probably like a cover 2 or something like that, but they're never in it because they're blitzing so much. So what you see like a 3 deep, so like traditional cover 3, like corners are deep, safeties deep. And then you see some form of 3 underneath. And so when you think about it from a coverage standpoint, it's just simple math, right? If I have 3 underneath coverage players, like, I can't cover as much grass. So there tends to be really huge throwing windows in the middle level of the defense. Obviously, you don't want to get too deep in there, but in the middle level of the defense, like on digs and hitches and kind of these spot routes that are a little bit deeper in there, there's a ton of grass. So if you feel like you can pick up the pressure, I'd sling the rock a little bit, man. Like, I would throw it a little bit. Now, how confident are you that you can do that? I have no idea. And so one of the things they've talked about, or Dan's talked about from the jump, is playing complementary football. And people talk about, like, what does that mean? And so let's kind of peel that back a little bit. If I'm playing complementary football and I'm an offense, I need to get first downs. I need to chew a little bit of clock, right? Because we're kind of relying on the defense to support us offensively, and offensively we're supporting the defense. So if we go down and we go 3 and out real quick, we're not playing complementary football because we're letting the defense out on the field for way too long. If I score too quickly in some cases, I'm not playing complementary football. So I think you'll see them run the ball a lot, but I think you're going to see it from spread formations. Because you talked about how they still kind of play their 3-4 versus nickel. They do, but I think if you kind of play your cards right, you can get them in a 4-down structure, which just watching them, it doesn't feel like they want to be in that. And just from a number standpoint, it feels better for us. So let's say we've got 5 offensive linemen and B-Rob, and we're in a spread formation. If they lead 6 in the box, and we've got overhang players like these kind of slot receivers, and they have 6 in there, that means one of those dudes is open. So let's run a little RPO. Let's run a little zone read. Let's put those guys in conflict on first and second down. And then if they're going to bring pressure on third down, let's make sure we got a rock solid plan to pick this sucker up. Whether that's leaving a tight end in, bring it back in, like, we can pick it up. And I think we've seen over the course of Ron Rivera's tenure here, when this team has played Todd Bowles defenses, like, they've, like Scott Turner, to his credit, had great plans for the blitz, and Taylor Heinicke is able to dice them up in a playoff game and in their regular season game when they were throwing for touchdowns and stuff. So I think if you have a plan, that's how it's going to work. But I do think you need to run the football, again, to possess the ball a little bit, slow the game down, take some pressure off of Jayden Daniels. And so for those big moments where it's like, hey, 3rd and 5, we got to have it, he feels comfortable and confident to make that play.
Yeah, one skill that is never going to show up on a quarterback stat line, but is super duper important on a very fundamental baseline level is, do you properly target your runs? Right. And obviously Biotish might be the guy who's doing that. But it's specifically against a team that blitzes a lot. Are you running into the blitz or are you running away from the blitz?
Yeah.
Because if you run away from the blitz, well, they're taking multiple defenders out of the play because they're trying to, the way they're going to run is they're going to run at the quarterback and basically take themselves out of where the running back is headed. If you run into the blitz, well, then you're obviously got multiple extra defenders that you're not accounting for in the blocking structure. And so, long story short, Logan.
1 second. There's like a nerdy. This is really nerdy. So sorry, this might be too nerdy for this podcast. But when you
there's no such thing as too nerdy for this podcast.
So when you're blitzing on first and second down, you're going to create movement, right? So like if I'm blitzing to the offensive right, the defensive line hypothetically should stunt to the left because we need to now account for the gaps that we're adding to the front side of this run. So some people say, "Oh, I want to run away from the pressure." But oftentimes it's harder to run that way because the line is stunting that way. So what they like to do usually is say, hey, I'm going to attack the blitz and catch them out of the stunt, kick out the blitzer, hypothetically. Let's just say they're bringing like a Sam, like just one, and they're stunting everybody else. I can kick that guy out and we can catch them in the stunt and we can get up to the second level easier. So I think that's definitely an interesting kind of, if you want some nerdy football stuff to watch, is like, what do they do with the pressure? Are they running at it? Are they running away from it? Are they checking out of stuff? Do they want to throw the ball? Like that's the layers that I think we're going to be seeing from Cliff and this offensive staff.
It's the chess game. Right. And well, my point was that like it's super important for Jayden to be able to correctly, and Biotish to correctly identify who's coming and then understand is Tampa a team that is going to do what you just said? Is it, or are they not actually that good at that? Or do they, whether it's plan wise or execution wise, like where should you be sending the run? Which is often, I don't know how this offense works specifically. I don't know if you know how this offense works specifically, how much flexibility they have to make sure that we can just flip the run right, left, depending on what we see at the line of scrimmage. I know in Kyle's offense, we've talked about that quite a bit, like how you guys would go to the line of scrimmage with two runs, and then if both of them kind of sucked based off the look, it's like, screw it, let's have a third play in there. That's a pass.
Your brain.
Let's have a Charles Dickens novel of a play call. But for Cliff, like, is that something that's and the ability to try to get in the right run? If that's a way that they're going to counter the blitz.
Yeah, I think, just watching, I mean, when you watch practice, I know they're kind of in this, like, hurry up, no huddle a big percentage of the time, but it just seems when you watch, like, training camp practice, even the open practices, that they do have a lot of flexibility at the line. Now, I don't know what that flexibility look like. It seems very unlikely to me that they would have two plays called. It seems like what they would do, and this is pure speculation, just based on, like, their language and how they do it at the line of scrimmage, it seems like they're coaching to a look. So what I mean by that is, like, they'll install a play, for example. Let's say it's, I don't know, at a 21 personnel with B-Rob and Austin in the backfield. Like, if we get a 6-man pressure, a 5-man pressure on first down, I want you to check to this run or this screen. And we're not calling it, but like when we get up there and you see it, like, this is the home run look. So let's just check to the play. I don't need to call it every time because I want you to.
It's what Jayden did in the preseason when he wasn't supposed to because, that wasn't technically, like, it was the right thing. It was just like, hey, man, we're not doing that in the preseason. But he saw the look and he went for it and he hits Diami for 40 yards up the sideline.
Or it's like, I think another great example is the Sam Hartman in the third quarter of that same game when they get 0 and they run speed option. Like, that's a great call. I know they did not have speed option. It wasn't like stick and speed option. No, it was like, oh, this is 0. I can call speed option if I want. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not like, it's not structured the same way Kyle is, or it's like, here's 5 plays that we're all calling in the huddle. You got to remember them and we're going to check to them. It's like, no. It's like, if we get the home run, if we get the look we're looking for, check to this and we're going to run it. So I think that's kind of where I would say that to your point, the Jayden Daniels, like, awareness of what is happening is going to be super important. And I think that could be challenging this week because we haven't seen any of those looks on film. Because like we just talked about, there are certain core tenets that Todd Bowles is going to abide by. But I do think that you're going to see some novel stuff from him also. And so, like, how do you put those home run looks in when you don't know exactly what he's going to be doing, especially week 1? Like, defensive coordinators change. They add wrinkles. They're different coming out of the offseason. So I think that to me is another really compelling thing too for Joe Witt Jr. and Jayden Daniels and Cliff Kingsbury. It's like there's this novelty of what's going to be seen. Like you could go back and watch all the film in the world, but you don't know how he's going to play this offense. Because I tried to go back and I was like, when was the last time this team played? And I couldn't figure it out because you're like, was Todd Bowles there? Actually, Bruce Arians was the coach. Like, you know what I'm saying? So It gets a little bit dicey, but I do think that to me is going to be really interesting. Is how they get into those check looks, if you will.
Yeah. Counterpoint, way to simplify a defense, tempo. And that is something that this team uses. So I think that's going to be an interesting part of the chess match as well, is how does the tempo, because that is one thing we talk about, like the principles of a coordinator, right? There's certain stuff that Todd Bowles is going to change. I doubt that how Todd Bowles reacts, if he has certain things he's been doing for a decade to 3-by-1 or, to tempo, like we're defaulting to this call. Like tempo is a great equalizer to simplify a defense. And so I do wonder how much Cliff is going to rely on that, because again, with the complementary football element, tempo can run counter to that. You go fast and it doesn't work. Well, now you've gone 3 and out quickly, and that's Dan Quinn is going to be like, all right, we probably should huddle up and slow things down a little bit. So that is the game management aspect is fascinating. And this is why I think we've captured in this pod maybe more than anyone that we've ever have, like the chess match and like if this then that. Well, okay, if that then this. That happens literally every single week in the NFL.
Yeah, and again, you try to prep your way through it and say like, oh, this is kind of like, but ultimately you don't know. So I think obviously it's going to be harder for Joe Witt Jr. this week, I think, because it's a totally new offensive staff. They're going to try and abide by the same offensive system as they did last year. At least that's what I've been reading in Tampa Bay. But it's going to be new, and then Jayden Daniels, it's going to be new. And like, what does Todd Bowles do? Like, maybe it's like, hey, we're not going to blitz you at all. And we've put all these blitz beating concepts in. And so then our offense gets really tight. Or maybe the tempo, maybe they check to something in tempo that we're not expecting. And then our tempo stuff doesn't look good. Like there's teams that say, oh, you're going to go tempo? Let's go 0. Good luck getting the ball out. You know what I'm saying? Like, and then it's like, oh, well, do we feel comfortable about our tempo stuff now or what? So I just think like that. That's why this game to me is so fun. That's why the first game's always fun. It's always a little bit of a crapshoot. Like, are we in the right stuff? But that's why I'm so excited to watch this football game.
For sure. Last thing that we should talk about, Logan. The one thing that overrides everything else, good football players. And the Commanders have locked up one of their best for the next 4 years. Sam Cosmi signs a 4-year, I think it was like $76 million extension. That, or I'm just thinking of his jersey number. But his $18.5 million average annual value makes him one of the better paid guards, obviously, in the league. I think this is a really smart deal. I mean, obviously, it's tremendous for Sam. That's a lot of money. And he was really emotional and I thought candid and talking about how much this means to him and his family. First-generation American. His family comes here. He finds football, and now he's got generational wealth. That is as beautiful of a story as you can get through this game. And for the team, like Sam is a guy that I think some analysts will tell you is one of the best guards in the league. Others maybe not as high on him, or would say like, oh, that's a projection. Maybe he could be that. But you lock him in now as opposed to him having a Pro Bowl season and the rest of the league being like, hey, this dude's awesome. And then he's costing you $25 million a year next offseason. I think this is a really smart move by Adam Peters and company to go, okay, we've seen enough. We got in here. We saw the player. We saw the person. We like what we see. Let's lock it down.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. I think because everyone's like, oh, they're moving on from all these Ron Rivera draft picks, but like obviously, if you're a good football player, they want you around. And I think the fact that they're doing it now, especially after watching him in camp, he was on his stuff, man. Like there was periods in the one-on-one, like one-on-one pass rush where it's like he's going against John Allen, and it's like I remember him when he was younger, just not being able to touch John Allen, and now it's like toe-to-toe with the champ. Deron Payne comes up next, and he's got him locked down, and not that Deron and John had bad camps. It just can't, like Cosmi was playing so well through training camp. So I'm really excited for him, obviously for his family. It's fantastic. And I'm excited for the organization. Like I think when you have a cornerstone like that on the offensive line, a guy that is kind of getting the culture you want. I think one of the things like when you talk to fans, it's like, oh, we don't have a Trent Williams. We don't have a Brandon Sheriff. Like this is that guy. I think he could be that guy. Let's just say that. And so then next year you go out and you draft a guy, and then all of a sudden you've got this person that they can look to and say, if I want to get paid or if I want to be a starter, like this is what I have to do. And I think that's just good process is identifying that guy early, getting him locked in, and now we don't have to worry about giving him like a super max extension in a couple of years.
For sure. And I think the other, I think the other thing that you mentioned there is like the leadership capacity, right? And like Trent and Brandon were a little bit different. I mean, Trent's different because Trent's Trent. But like Trent was a lead by example in how he played kind of guy. But Trent was so supremely talented that I don't know that you'd be like, oh, Trent is the hardest worker that I've ever seen in my entire life. Yeah. Like he definitely did his work.
You didn't have to. Like, did I ever tell you this story? This is like a little aside, Trent aside. So like basically they were like, hey, Trent, we want you to be more involved with like, you know, like stay in the building longer. And he looked at him and was like, did I like play bad? It's like, no. And it's like, what was my grade? And it was like, you graded out like at a 95%, which is like insane. It's insane to grade that well. That means no mental mistakes. You're probably playing really well. He goes, then why do I need to stay? And they just were like, like there's no retort to that because like you're like not only is he physically playing well, but he's not making any mistakes. So like he's like, why do I need to study and be around? And they wanted him to kind of bring along the young guys, but he's like, that's not my job necessarily. Like I don't have any interest in that. Like and so to your point, like he was a guy that like was awesome, an awesome teammate, awesome to be around, awesome to hang out with. But he wasn't going to do that extra stuff because he never had to, and that's fine. That worked for him, and so I just thought that's an interesting story. Like because he's so like people don't get how talented he was. Like they get physically, but like just how intuitive football was for him. Like that's what makes him special too. So
yeah, no, for sure, and you know that's really well put. That intuitive nature. But a guy like Cosmi is a little bit more of a grinder, right? And Sheriff was like that too, but Brandon was pretty quiet and I think more like to himself. I think he grew into a leadership role, and then ultimately when he was probably ready to blossom, he was also ready to get paid, and he went off to Jacksonville and got a whole bunch of change down there. But I think for Cosmi, in talking to him and listening to him speak over the past couple of years, like he's really emerged as a leader in that room, offensive line-wise, and in the offense in general. And so having that guy around as a culture setter. And again, like, yeah, he's a draft pick from the previous regime, but if you are bought into what they're doing in this regime, they're more than happy to have you. And there's multiple guys we can say that about, but of those guys, Cosmi, you know, from a skill standpoint and certainly from an age contractual, like it makes sense that he's first in line to get paid. But John is bought in, Duran is bought in, you know, Terry's bought in. That's why those guys are still around. Jayden bought in. That's why those guys are still around. And then it comes down to the play on the field, and the play on the field for Sam Cosmi has been excellent. So, you know, this is great, as you said, for the team. It's great to have that cornerstone on the offense. I think it's always great to have a cornerstone on your offensive line, like you were saying as well, as one of your leaders. Like I think one of your leaders on your team should be an offensive lineman. There's just an attitude, and he's got that both the nasty physical toughness and everything that you want, and he's shown that since he was a rookie. But you really see it, you know, as he's grown and matured in his game. And so congrats to Sam, and excited to see where this goes. Anything else on Cosmi or anything else on this game before we wrap it up here?
No, just the last thing on Sam was also I think he's got like kind of the playful nature that I think the staff is looking for, like the love of football. Like you see when you're at practice, like doing the cartwheels and dapping everybody up, and like they want that here. They want a guy who's going to grind, but also understands that this is a game and is having fun. So to me, it just feels like a perfect cultural piece. And with regards to the game, just can't wait to watch this football game.
No doubt about it. All right, we'll be back on Sunday night, instant reaction show. 7:30 is when we're going to do those shows all year long. If there's a 1 or a 4 o'clock game, basically when the 4 o'clock games end, we'll hop on for home games. It'll be me and Logan. For road games, with Logan being on the road with the team as part of the radio broadcast this year, it'll be me and a rotating cast of our biggest names from 106.7 The Fan and the Team 980. So tune in Sunday night, and we'll see who's in this other box. Hopefully we'll know ahead of time most of the time, but with it being week 1, we're battening down the hatches and getting everything organized on our end, but we'll see you Sunday night. For Logan, I'm Craig. We will see you for our next pod, looking back at the tape on Tuesday morning. And until then, enjoy the games, everybody. Football's here. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.